Hello, welcome to another episode of Science Talks, a conversation hosted by the University of Arizona's BIO5 Institute. My name is Amy Randall Barber. Today we are joined by Caroline Mosley, who is currently the Senior Manager of Communications and Content at BIO5. Caroline has always had an interest in science. She studied invasive species and lake ecosystems in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Afterwards, she moved to Washington, D.C. to work in marine policy and environmental advocacy. Today, she lives in Arizona, focusing on digital content and social media at the University of Arizona. Thank you so much for joining us today, Caroline.
Great to be here.
So we have a couple of really fun questions just to set the pace and just, this is, we're just hanging out. Rapid fire questions. Netflix or Hulu?
Netflix.
Dogs or cats?
I have cats, but I love dogs.
Okay. Art gallery or history museum?
It's tough. Can I say science museum?
That's great. That's great. I love it. So can you just tell us a little bit about how you first developed your interest in science?
Yeah, so I grew up in Wisconsin, and I was very fortunate to live a little bit out in the country around ponds, and so I always loved going outside and looking at ponds and thinking about all the little critters in the ponds, and I loved to catch frogs, learned about all the different bugs, looked at the water and the algae, and I just was always interested in how everything was connected and how there was so much life in such a small little area. So that kind of to me was like a starting point of just kind of studying the natural world around me. And then my parents are very encouraging of that. We went on a lot of nature walks and hikes, and so I was kind of immersed in nature a lot, and so that kind of got me curious about how the natural world works.
Yeah, that curiosity is usually what sparks the science,
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you got into science communication, were you a researcher? Can you tell us about your experience being in the field?
Yeah, so before I kind of started writing about science and talking to scientists, I went to graduate school and I did some environmental chemistry studying lake ecosystems in Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. So my project was looking at nutrient cycling, or how I put it, studying mussel poop. So very...
Nutrient cycling.
Yes, nutrients, okay. the nutrients, AKA, you follow the poop in a system like Lake Michigan, which is very oligotrophic, which means very low nutrients. It's kind of easy to see where the energy is in the system looking at the poop, because that's where all the nutrients are.
Okay.
So in Lake Michigan, we have a lot of invasive species, and I studied the dracaenid mussels, or also called the zebra mussels or the quagga mussels, that came from Russia, actually, through the St. Lawrence Sea Canal. Oh. So they came through in the ballast water probably like 50, 60 years ago, and they really, because they're filtering their mussels, they draw the nutrients from the water kind of down to the lake bed. So that kind of just changes the whole dynamics of where the nutrients are. So I would kind of, my job was to study that. And so it was really fun. I got to spend time in the lab and in the field. So in the field, we'd go out on these little boats in the middle of Lake Michigan, and we'd actually scoop up mussels from the lake floor, and we'd have to count them, see how many are in a certain square meter. I'd actually take them on the boat and do little experiments in flasks to see how much they could actually filter. So it was really enjoyable. I love being out in the water. I love being an active part of science. It was fun to kind of see the mussels kind of in their ecosystem, but then also taking them out of that and studying actually the nutrients. I did some chemical analysis to kind of better understand how they filtered, how fast they filtered, what they filtered, and things like that. So that was really fun. I had a really great experience. Kind of funny how I was saying about, I spent a lot of time looking at ponds. I originally wanted to study ponds. I didn't really want to study big bodies of water. But my parents were like, hey, there's this new program at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. You should check it out. It's all about, they thought all water research was the same. But the thing is, limnology on the Great Lakes is essentially marine. All the equipment, because the lakes are so deep, all the equipment we use is essentially the same stuff you use for any sort of marine science. And another funny thing is I get really motion sick, and I get really boat sick and car sick. So I had a great time, but looking back, I don't think I would do it again, because I spent a lot of my time kind of motion sick on the boat.
Oh, no.
So I learned that about myself, but it was still a really great experience. But that's like the two things. It was the dichotomy of not feeling very well, but also being really excited about the science I was doing.
Oh my goodness. Oh goodness. Well, hey, we always learn new things all the time, don't
Exactly.
we? About ourselves. Although I think you knew did you know you were seasick before?
I mean,
like you had an inclination?
I had an inclination, but I didn't put two and two together that me studying a lake would mean me going out on the boat and being on a boat for, all day.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
so many
but
hours.
I learned, but I got pretty good at managing it. So anyway.
Oh, that's cool.
But doesn't kind of makes you stronger. Right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely, absolutely. So, what made you realize you liked science communication more than being in the field?
So I've always loved to write and read. I was a really voracious reader growing up, and but I also love the natural world. And when I was in college, I did look into going into journalism, but there was a time when it was in 2008, so the economy wasn't doing too good, and I thought job security. I think I should go into science. Maybe that's more secure, and so I ended up going into science. But then, as I was doing the science and as I was going through grad school, I really enjoyed it, but I thought, man, I'm so curious about everything. I don't think I can focus on one thing. And I love just talking to different researchers and faculty and students and learning about what they're doing. I don't think I could study one thing. I'd rather talk to people about what they do, and I'd rather support them. And so I kind of started doing research, and I kind of found this field of science communication, which is still kind of it's kind of like a vague field, but I was like, okay, I think there's a place for me. So, after I graduated, I didn't really want to go work. A lot of people would go into work at like the Department of Natural Resources or kind of, jobs where you go in the field and you do science. And I just thought I didn't want to do that. And a lab mate of mine actually he'd gotten a fellowship in Washington, D.C., and so I applied for this fellowship. It was through Sea Grant, which is through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And I ended up getting it. I moved to DC, and it opened up this world of there's all these different people that maybe aren't doing the science, but they're supporting science. And so I kind of started to see a little bit of a path for me in this kind of supporting role. And so I've kind of been on this journey to find a way to write about science and explore that science while supporting research. So that's kind of where I've really decided that I think science communication kind of encompasses that in many different ways, because there's many different kinds of science communication, I think.
Right,
so,
you get to tell the story in
the
many
best
different
part.
areas of science,
Exactly.
not just one. Yeah,
I get to
fun.
explore it all.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. What are you most excited about in your role here at BIO5?
I think I'm just most excited to talk to all the faculty and students. That's been the best part in whatever role that I've had at the University of Arizona, is kind of connecting with the people doing the work and learning from them. It's definitely like the highlight of my job. That's kind of why I got into this. And a lot of it is getting to know people too, and kind of building those relationships, because ultimately my goal is how can I help you help me? How can I promote your research? How can I help you find services? If it's a student, how can I help you get a portfolio piece, and if you're working for me. So I think just making those connections. And I think at BIO5, kind of, as we mentioned, there's all these different disciplines. So before it was kind of more focused on the environment or focused more on health sciences, but here I'm really at that intersection and highlighting that connection of how it fits together, because that's where the innovation happens, as maybe cheesy as it sounds, but I think it's true. I mean, when you get people that come together that think differently to solve problems, that's how we make cool things happen.
Yeah,
so
and we see that all the time here. I mean, and they're such rock stars. These scientists are rock stars in their own, world, and it's just really fun. I find it really fun to work with them here. So
the best part. And I'm genuinely excited about that. Not even, I think it's gonna be really cool. I think I'm gonna be challenged in certain ways, but that's exciting. I like to be challenged, so I'm ready to take it on.
Awesome. Well, do you have any advice for the next generation?
Yeah, I think for anyone who's interested, I mean, I still say for myself, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I've kind of come to terms with that. I think for a long time, I guess for context, both my parents they're now retired, but they're physicians. So, they were always on this set path, and I always thought that's how life was. And I have some friends that are lawyers and some friends that are, I have a friend that's a vet. It's a very set path. You kind of do step A to get step B, step C, and I always was kind of looking for that path. I've had a very winding path, but I think one thing that I've realized is sometimes you have to figure out what you don't like. That's been helpful for me. People ask me, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I can tell you what I don't want to do. And that might be actually more helpful. Maybe you really like science or science communication, but you don't like writing. That's okay. There's all different kinds of science communication. I mean, you can edit written stories, you can be a photographer, you can work on the website, you can, build websites, you can learn coding. There's all different ways to support it. So don't feel like you actually have to know right away. And I mean, like we said, I think it's just being curious about it, and not giving up. And I think I will say, like, it does get easier as you get older. You kind of gain some experience and kind of learn more about yourself. But I think to start, also just don't be afraid. What I wanted to do, I mean, when I first graduated and I was in Wisconsin, there weren't any jobs for me. Like, there was nothing that interested me. So I kind of had to push myself outside and look to see what was outside of there. And I did that by just talking to people. So another piece of advice I would say is like network, and that can just be making a LinkedIn and sending a message to people with a specific ask. Hey, I see you work at NOAA. I'm really interested in marine policy. What's your favorite part of your job? Those little things can maybe help you just gather little bits of information. Yeah. So I think there's little things you can do, and don't feel like you have to know what you want to do right now. So
yeah, good advice. That's good advice. Absolutely. Well, so we have a fun question for our final question. If you could have a superpower, what would it be? And it doesn't have to be related to science. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
I would have to say I would love to be able to talk to animals. I would love to talk to animals. Yep. One of my favorite books, series when I was growing up, was Animorphs. I don't know if you've heard about that, but basically there's an alien invasion. Oh. And it's this book series, and these kids get these superpowers where they turn into different animals. That's how they save the world. Oh. Which is not, I guess that's a different superpower, is turning into animals. But I would say either turning into animals or talking to animals. I think realistically talking to animals would be really interesting, just because I always, you look at animals and you can't help but to anthropomorphize them and think that they're having little conversations. Yeah. So I think that would be my superpower.
Always wondering, what's going on in
their little heads.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and it was a pleasure to talk to you and get to know you better. And I enjoy working with you every day anyway, and we get to talk and do this fun podcast, so thank you.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Science Talks. Continue the conversation with us next time as we learn more about the amazing science happening at the University of Arizona's BIO5 Institute.